Society slaps a label on them: cold, ungrateful, selfish rebels who abandon their own blood, and the story ends there. Yet looked and saw something else entirely, not traitors, but the only eyes open in a sleeping house. To leave is not always a rupture. Sometimes it is the last coherent act of a person who can no longer breathe under the family's invisible weight. In his clinical work found that walking away from family is often not weakness, but a desperate sanity. Families do not merely share faces and names, they share an unconscious covenant, a dark pool of unspoken rules and agreed forgettings. Abuse is renamed discipline. Neglect becomes a badge of independence. Cruelty is softened into strong character. Whoever points out these translations is cast as the troublemaker. Imagine an unwritten contract signed before you were born: what may be spoken, and what must be silenced. The family unconscious enforces this contract through looks, through sudden changes of subject, through that thick tension that falls over the room when someone touches the one forbidden truth. It is sustained by everyone's consent. To break it is to break the pact that keeps the house intact. Enter the truth teller, the child who notices, the soul who listens when the others avert their eyes. They witness the cycle of rage, the emotional manipulations disguised as care, the golden child and scapegoat choreography played on repeat. But noticing was not enough. They absorbed the pain, tried to repair what was unrepairable, and in doing so developed what named differentiated perception, an ability to read the emotional weather, to feel the gap between speech and meaning. This gifted sensitivity is not mystical, it is adaptation. In a home where accurate reading of moods meant safety, a person learns to sense and to suffer. The family then points and says, "You are the sick one. You are too sensitive, you create drama, you need help." The label fits neatly and spares the system. The patient becomes the symptom, and the system keeps its secret. But the person who leaves is not the illness, they are the fever that announces it. Their departure is a healthy response to an unhealthy climate. To stand away from the shared delusion allows oxygen back into lungs that had learned to live on fumes. From a distance, they can finally breathe and discover the possibility of another life. Families rarely admit this truth, because to do so would be to accept a structural fault. Better to stitch a narrative of ingratitude, to gather around a victim story that erases questions. The one who left watches as the old pattern repeats, now narrated as their betrayal, called the process individuation, the painful, solitary task of becoming oneself apart from roles assigned by someone else's unconscious needs. You cannot become whole while you perform the part written for you by the family's shadow. Sometimes leaving is not abandonment, but initiation, the painful yet necessary step toward integrating what was denied. The black sheep may seem like a wound to the household, but in truth they bear the symptom that finally makes healing possible. If your family cast you as the scapegoat, you learn to swallow their blame until it becomes your habit. If they made you the fixer, you burn out trying to mend wounds that were never yours to close. If they crowned you the golden child, you suffocate beneath the weight of their projected fantasies. Individuation demands separation, not always a suitcase and a door closed, but a psychological border, the clear sense of where you end and they begin. You must learn to hear which thoughts belong to you and which are echoes implanted in childhood, to tell apart guilt that signals real wrongdoing from the guilt that means you are simply stepping off an old script. The moment you name these roles, something shifts. You begin to see that your family does not truly know you. They know only the part they needed you to play. And then you face a terrible, simple choice: continue performing in a play you never auditioned for, or walk off the stage and meet the person waiting in the wings. This is the breaking point described, rarely sudden, rarely a single eruption. It is death by 1,000 small betrayals, followed by a cold, perfect clarity, the 100th request to ignore your reality, the demand to apologize for the boundaries you set, the siblings' insistence that the abuse never happened, and in that instant you realize nothing will change. That clarity is not fury, it is a sober survival decision. You choose your sanity over their comfort, your future over their past, yourself when they never chose you. Then the guilt arrives, and it is a masterful instrument. Society waves sacred texts and duty like weapons: honor your parents, forgive, remember that blood is thicker than water, conveniently omitting that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. Chosen bonds often outlast biological accidents. Guilt strikes on many levels: the shallow shame of disappointing others, the deeper penalty for breaking an unspoken family rule that equates loyalty with silent suffering, and beneath both, the existential ache of choosing your life and your sanity as worthy. Answer this with a stark assertion: your first duty is to your own soul, not to blind biological obligation. He watched patients destroy themselves to preserve relationships that hollowed them out. He saw sensitive, brilliant people shrink into shells to avoid displeasing parents who were never satisfied. What understood is simple and terrible. Remaining in a toxic family does not protect anyone. It hands the dysfunction, like an inheritance, to the next generation. When you accept mistreatment, you teach your children that love includes harm. When you ignore your needs, you model self-betrayal. When you keep the family secrets, you become complicit in the cover-up. The theoretical map drew around family dynamics is useful, but the actual terrain of walking away is something he could only observe from his clinic. And from the other side of that decision, the lived truth is both harsher and more healing than S-theory alone can capture. Cutting off family sounds extreme, cold, unimaginable to those watching from the outside. How could anyone abandon the people who raised them? Yet for some, leaving is not cruelty but survival. From childhood we are taught that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water. These injunctions are everywhere, in films, songs, schoolroom lessons, demanding forgiveness, loyalty, endurance. But what if staying slowly destroys you? What if the hands that should protect wound you most deeply? This is where estrangement begins, not a single unresolved fight, but the end of a fundamental human connection: holidays, birthdays, weddings, funerals, a willingness to accept that some faces may never be seen again. Why endure this severing? Because pain accumulates, years or decades of harm that make remaining impossible without losing oneself. Abuse comes in many guises: blows that scar the skin, words that hollow the spirit, neglect that denies basic care, manipulation that makes you doubt your reality. Children who grow up in such houses learn to survive by becoming small, by walking on eggshells, by reading moods as if their lives depended on it. They learn the terrible lesson that those who should love them unconditionally are the ones who hurt them most. For many survivors, leaving is not a sudden act, but the reluctant end of a long experiment. You try talking, you set boundaries, you forgive one more time, always hoping this will be the time things change, until the painful truth arrives: that some relationships cannot be healed, no matter how hard you work, and some people will not change, no matter how many chances you give them. Often the home is kept alive by perpetual conflict, or by naming one person the problem. Perhaps you were the one who asked too many questions, the sensitive, the different, the one who would not pretend the wound was not there, and you learn that your true self is unwelcome. In other families' boundaries are myths. Parents rifle through your private things, siblings trade your secrets, relatives reserve themselves the right to judge every choice. Privacy is seen as disloyalty, and growing up without limits means you may not even know what you lack until much later. Then something shifts, you move away and taste the cost of choosing for yourself. You meet someone who shows a healthy love. Therapy illuminates the fact that what you endured was not care but control wearing a gentler face, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. The decision is rarely impulsive, it is the product of years of thought, and the slow accruing of small betrayals until one day clarity arrives. The cost of staying outweighs the cost of leaving. People describe that moment as a kind of death, the death of the dream of the family you wanted, and afterwards, the relief can be immediate. The chronic tension eases, the chest loosens, you breathe. Yet relief sits beside a strange, deep grief for a mother you wished could be different, for a father who might have been kind, for gatherings you will no longer attend, and for the web of aunts, uncles, heritage, and traditions that phrase when you step away. The world offers little mercy. Tell someone you are estranged, and you meet judgment in their eyes, as if choosing survival were an unforgivable betrayal. People who have never lived inside a toxic family cannot fathom it. Their well-meaning advice, you only get one mother. Family is family, lands like salt in a fresh wound. Holidays and milestones become traps. Weddings, births, achievements arrive wrapped in a bittersweet silence, because the seats that should cheer are empty, and you carry that absent chair to every table. Those who leave are not begging for pity, they have reached the terrible fork, where they must choose between the family they were given and the life they still might have. Choosing yourself after years of always putting others first requires an almost furious kind of strength. It means risking loneliness, deserting a safety net that was never safe. Slowly, however, life reknits itself. You learn who you are, you begin to trust your judgment, and you find people who show up, friends, partners, mentors, who become a chosen family built on mutual care rather than obligation. Chosen family is quieter and truer. No one stays because they must, everyone stays because they want to. You set the standards. You decide what love looks like. Observe this again and again. The black sheep who left often became the healthiest, not because they were superior, but because they broke the family's cycle, refused to pass on the shadow, and chose consciousness over comfortable denial. This is not hatred, it is preservation, a recognition that you can wish someone well from a safe distance, while refusing to return to the poison. Love need not mean exposure to destruction. Think of a gardener pruning a tree. Dead branches are removed, not from spite, but to give the living parts room to thrive. Sometimes you must prune the family tree to save your own roots, sever the draining connections so new growth can take hold. Saw this as courage, not cruelty. It takes more strength to walk away than to stay and suffer. Staying is passive, leaving is active. Staying is expected, leaving is what the soul demands. The one who cuts contact is not fleeing love, but running toward themselves. The path from estrangement to healing is not linear. There are days of strength and freedom, days when grief strikes without warning, moments of doubt and moments of unexpected peace, when the old anxiety has finally lifted and laughter returns. Healing arrives in waves, not neat stages. A stranger's voice, a holiday jingle, the smell of a childhood dish can trigger you, and these triggers do not mean you were wrong to leave, only that you are human, grieving loss while celebrating liberation. When you stop trying to earn love from those who cannot give it, you become available to receive love from those who can. When you stop explaining yourself to the determinedly blind, you find people who understand without argument. When you stop shrinking to fit a family system that was never large enough, you discover how vast you are. The transformation is slow and grave. You will mourn both the family you lost and the family you never had, but through that mourning a self emerges that is truly yours, a life aligned with your values, relationships built on authenticity rather than obligation. You become proof that the thing you feared would destroy you can, instead, free you. Believed that the individuated person does more than save themselves. They become a quiet beacon, showing others that escape is possible, that one can leave and not only survive but thrive, breaking the family curse by refusing to pass on the shadow. Those who cut ties often gain a hard-won wisdom. They know pain in a depth most never will. They learn to protect their peace, to set boundaries, and to insist that love never requires self-erasure. The decision to cut off your family is, at its root, an act of self-love and self-respect, a declaration that your psyche matters, that you deserve relationships which lift rather than erode you. This choice is rarely easy, but it grants you permission to live fully. If you have already chosen this path, or if you are contemplating it, know this: you are not alone, and you are not a bad person for protecting yourself. You did not fail your family by walking away. In many ways, your family failed you long before you left, and your courage to step back reveals how strong you truly are. You are not cold, ungrateful, or broken. You are awake. You saw patterns others denied, felt pains others minimized, and chose healing over pretense. Sometimes love looks like distance. Sometimes the most loyal act you can perform for your soul is to refuse the role your family assigned you. Understood this, the aim is not permanent solitude, but safety in your own life, wholeness and freedom from the slow poison that was destroying you. And sometimes the only road to that peace is the hardest goodbye you will ever speak. Thank you for being here with us today. If you broke the cycle, chose sanity over approval, walked away to save yourself, this message is for you. Subscribe for more insights into the psychology of becoming your authentic self. Remember, choosing yourself is never selfish, it is survival, true strength, and the opening of a new chapter. See you in the next dimension of the alchemist's path, perception training for empaths, turning overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception work. Feel deeply while thinking clearly.